Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Hello, and thanks so much for joining us here for episode 194 with Elaine Bennett. We are talking writing, and Elaine brings it in terms of how to write all the more clearly and powerfully. So you'll learn 1, 2 essential pieces of information you need to be a more effective writer. 2, how you can make a bigger impact through storytelling. And 3, winning ways to turn straight thinking into straight writing. So if you'd like to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we reference here, you can find that over at awesomeatyourjob.com/ep194. And while at awesomeatyourjob.com, I encourage you to check out some of our great stuff. One thing I'll highlight right here is the 10 Days to Winning at Work email course. So these are selected excerpts of the most actionable tidbits I can put in email form from my enhanced thinking and collaboration training programs I do with teams. We've had some really cool success stories in terms of before and after every individual team member going through the programs, saving 86 minutes of waste chopped out of their work week. So hopefully you'll get a good piece of that just by doing the email course. And you can use that time to get home earlier or do more fun, creative, strategic work that you never seem to have time for amidst the urgency or whatever you want. So that's the 10 Days to Winning at Work email course over at awesomeatyourjob.com. Now, here's Elaine's story. Elaine Bennett had a baptism by fire as a speechwriter. Less than 2 years after she signed on to write for the CEO of Salomon Brothers, scandal forced the executive to resign. In stepped investor Warren Buffett. Since working with Mr. Buffett, Elaine Bennett has continued putting words in the mouths of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and leading nonprofits. She unearths the stories behind business data and helps executives shape those stories into memorable messages. She also coaches individual professionals looking to develop executive caliber communication skills. Here is Elaine. Elaine, thanks so much for joining us here on the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast.
Oh, my pleasure, Pete.
You have an interesting array of historical clients and folks that you have worked with. And one I would love to hear a bit more about is, tell me, Warren Buffett, how did you get connected with him and what was your working relationship?
Well, I was the CEO speechwriter at Salomon Brothers, and he was the largest shareholder of Salomon Brothers. So we had all of his annual reports lying around the office, and I knew that he was considered a great business writer. So I started reading his annual reports whenever I had a couple minutes. And then at some point later, Salomon imploded and we very nearly went out of business. And Warren rode in on his white horse to be our interim CEO, which saved the company. And so I was sitting in a press conference, a gigantic press conference, to announce that Warren had come in. And somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You need to go back to your office. They need you to write something." And it turned out the thing they needed me to write was a letter to Salomon's clients that was going to go out under Warren's signature saying basically, sorry, our bad, we won't do it again. And so I wrote it, but I didn't know who was going to be reviewing it because this was the days before email and everybody who was above my boss had basically been fired. So I wrote my name at like a school paper. I wrote my name in the top corner and my office phone number, and I sent it out into the world. And the next day my phone rang and I picked it up and this voice said, "Elaine, this is Warren Buffett. Did you write this thing?" I said, "Well, yes, sir, I did." He said, "It sounds like I wrote it." I said, "Well, sir, that's my job." And that was the beginning of a really wonderful working relationship. And I should apologize because my Warren Buffett imitation actually sounds a lot more like Walter Brennan. But Warren does not sound so goofy in person. But anyway, it was a wonderful experience to work with him. He's a very smart man.
Well, that's so cool. And I'd love to hear, what was maybe a lesson or gem or tip or takeaway you picked up across the time you were working together?
Tell the truth. Tell the whole truth. Tell the truth. Don't hold anything back. If you've got something untoward that you need to talk about it, because people will forgive you an indiscretion or something bad that you did, but they are not going to forgive you for being, for lying.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's wise. And I've heard it said, and I agree that, when you screw up, people, they don't like it. They're like, they're sort of annoyed, but it's kind of understandable that you screwed up. But when you lie about screwing up, then it's a whole nother story.
Yeah. Well, when Warren came in, he said, look, if you make a mistake, make a mistake. But if you do anything that damages Salomon's reputation, you're out. And so while he was there, some clerk in the trading department, put an extra zero on something and cost the company a lot of money. And then, and Warren was like, that happens.
All right. Well, now we've covered that. Let's shift gears to talking about professionalism and professionals.
Yes.
And so you have towering expertise when it comes to writing and writing skills and helping people with that. I'd love it if maybe you could tee up the conversation by sharing with us, why are writing skills important and how many folks do you think got it?
They are very important. And I could probably count the number of really good business writers on the fingers of my hands. If you're in business, you read these white papers, you read these reports, you read the emails that people send you. It's a complete waste of time, because if people wrote more clearly, then the people they write to could read the things faster and understand them and act on them more efficiently. But there's a lot of really muddy business writing out there. I give you an example. I was listening to a podcast this morning, and I don't even remember which one it was. It was not yours. And the woman being interviewed, the guy asked her a question, and she's like, I'm really glad you asked me that question. And I was really glad when I read in the pre-read that you sent me that you were going to ask me that question, because it gave me an opportunity to think about what I would say when you asked me that. I mean, she went on for literally 2 minutes, just sort of bluffing until she could figure out the answer to the question that he had asked her, a day before or an hour before. And that kind of thing it makes my blood boil, because it's a waste of time. And so keep your audience in mind when you're writing. What is this person I'm writing to, whether it's an email or a speech or anything, what is the audience going to need to know? And what do I want them to do with that information? And if you can write your things with those two pieces of information in your head, you're going to be a much more effective writer.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so I think that's fantastically on the spot. And I appreciated how when you pitched me on you, which you did very well, 95+%.
Oh, thank you.
Don't get on the show. So I thought you did. You gave me what I needed to know. I was like, yes, sure enough. You connected to what we're about and showed me that you had relevant content as well as authority in the space, as well as engagingness to look at. And so I was like, that's what I need. Whereas I think a lot of times what I don't need it seems like a lot of publicists are maybe trying really hard to be topical to a news item. And it's like, well, I don't really care a lot about, United's woes or Uber's troubles.
Right,
like it's just,
right.
I don't really need that connection. And who knows when the show will air, if it's a month or two, after the news event has faded, regardless. So, all right, cool. Well, then, so that's a great broad perspective there when it comes to keep the audience in mind. What do they need to know? What do you want them to do? Any other sort of broad, universal perspectives or principles that you bear in mind when you do all your writing?
Sure. I just want to say that you have done a really good job of positioning your podcast, because the name of the podcast, How to Be Awesome at Your Job, tells you exactly what you're going to give me as a listener and what you want me to give your audience as the guest. So, of course, I'm going to give your audience tips to hopefully help them to be more awesome at their jobs. And one thing you can do is be aware of something called the curse of knowledge. Now, this is a term that was created by Chip Heath and Dan Heath in a really wonderful book they wrote called Made to Stick. And if your listeners haven't read Made to Stick, I would highly recommend it. And the curse of knowledge is when you know something so well, you have some information, like maybe you're a specialized person in finance, right? I once had a guy on Wall Street tell me, I'm going to have make a cash transaction with a disinterested third party. Mm-hmm. And I said, what? And he said, I'm going to the deli to buy a sandwich. Yeah. That's completely unnecessary. He was just showing off. But when you know so much about your subject, you can't just sort of open up the fire hydrant and give all of that information to your audience, especially if they don't have the same level of expertise that you do. So you have to figure out, you sort of have to take yourself back to when you were learning this. Did I understand what that term meant? I used the term C-suite in my blog a while back, and I got letters from some of my readers saying, I had to Google that. Mm-hmm. Or ROI. People don't always know right off that that's return on investment. So I hate acronyms anyway. I would always say return on investment. But be aware of what you know and talk to your audience at the level that they're at. You can bring them up a level if that's a wonderful thing to do, is to impart knowledge to people, but don't be given a graduate school lecture to fifth graders.
Okay. Oh, these are great principles. So, beware the curse of knowledge and think about what was it like before you knew those things, be cautious of acronyms, et cetera, and be thinking about the recipient and who are they? What do they need to know? What actions will they take? Okay. So now, is there sort of more of a step-by-step that you think through when you do your writing? So was it Warren Buffett who said that you turn straight thinking into straight writing?
Yes, Warren said that.
That's a nice endorsement. Nicely done.
Yeah.
Well, what's the protocol for making that happen?
How do you do that? Well, actually, that's really the curse of knowledge, because in order to turn out straight writing, you have to sort of straighten out the thinking for yourself, right? So know what you're saying, know who your audience is, know what they want and what you want from them, and then and tell stories. That's the most important thing you can do. Even in an email, and the story doesn't need to be 5 minutes long. It can just be one sentence. But if you can tell a story, then the listener or the reader is going to connect with your information in a different way than if you just gave them a bunch of facts. Mm-hmm. So you want them to get engaged in what you're writing, so that they will, remember what you've said. And if you don't want people to remember what you've said, then why are you saying it in the first place? And B, they will act on it. So telling stories is really the most important thing that you can do, whatever kind of communication you're doing.
Now, that's so fun with the storytelling there, because it does make a huge impact on the recipient in terms of just connections. And I'm making connections right now. We had a previous guest, Diana Boer. She told a tale. Ernest Hemingway was challenged to write a story super short, and it was just like, for sale, baby shoes, never worn. Like, whoa, that's brief, but it just packs a punch. And I'm so intrigued what happened to this poor child, So could you maybe give us some other examples then of, storytelling, email or verbally, one or two or three sentences? How do we pull that off? Because I think a lot of people are thinking storytelling equals, a big old narrative that's going to take a couple pages. So how do we deliver that fast?
So look at what I said in answer to your first question about Warren. I could have just said, well, I was working for Salomon Brothers and Warren came in as the CEO, the interim CEO, and so I got to work with him. Mm-hmm. Now, that's the same set of facts, but it's much less interesting. And it doesn't give you room as a listener. It doesn't give you room to put yourself in the story. But if I tell you, I was sitting in my office minding my own business and the phone rings and it's Warren Buffett on the line, well, you're going to be like, oh my God, how would I feel if that happened to me?
Yes.
And so it really draws you in. So that's just one way. So a story doesn't have to be a big, huge thing, right? So I was talking to my writing students the other day, and I was talking to them about overusing adjectives and adverbs. You really don't want to do that. And you don't really need to. If you read a writer like James Baldwin, I showed them a sentence that he wrote. It was a really long sentence. It was 157 words, and only 6 of them were adjectives or adverbs, but it was incredibly descriptive. Now, a story doesn't have to be 157 words long. This is the story I told them to explain that. It's like your living room furniture. Do you want an overstuffed sofa that's stuffed so full of adjectives and adverbs that you can't even sit on it? Or would you like to have a whole suite of furniture with the adjectives and adverbs spread out among the different pieces? So that's not a long story, but hopefully you've got a picture in your mind now of an overstuffed sofa that you don't want to sit on.
Okay, so you're saying that the metaphor here associated with the furniture counts. That's another means of delivering the story.
Absolutely. Anything that's not a straightforward fact counts as a story to me.
Okay, certainly. And so then what are the, fundamental components that make a story a story?
Surprise is a good component. Detail is amazing. I was just listening to Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, Revisionist History, and he's got the episode that I'm thinking of is one about a Nashville songwriter. And he talks about the details in songs, and he compares a very detailed country song that paints a picture to like the Rolling Stones' Wild Horses, which is a great song, but it's just like Wild Horses Couldn't Drag Me Away. That's not really a picture. Mm-hmm. That's a sort of a statement. So you want to paint a picture with your words because that's how people. So when you say what things, right? When you give people facts, they go into the what part of our brains. But when you give them stories or images, they go into the how part of our brains. And that's a much more active part, right? The what part is like a filing cabinet. The how part is like, a Rubik's Cube where you like manipulating it and trying to play with the images in your brain, sort of in the background, but it gets embedded in there. And so we remember things much more clearly when they're presented to us in story form.
Okay. Well, could you maybe give us one more example of, imagine in the business scenario, we've got a fact, associated with the survey results showed this.
Yeah.
Or whatever, or X% of people said why.
Right.
Could you maybe give us an example to take that from fact to story?
Sure. One of the best examples I've read recently was Sally Krawcheck's book. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but her book is called Own It. And she has a little nugget in there about the lack of women on boards of directors. Now, she could say, there's 17% women on boards of directors. That's a fact. But what she did say was something like, there are more men named John or James or George or William on American boards of directors than there are women.
Okay.
That just blew me away. Because, and an or, that's or, right? Not and. So there are more men named John than there are women. There are more, it's something that sticks to me.
Okay. That's good. Thank you. Well, then, can you tell us, when it comes to being remembered and acted on, sort of said that's kind of the point of what you're going for, do you have any sort of key processes or strategies for making that come to life? So telling stories, but also telling them, you need to tell people stories in the language that they have, right? So this is, again, it's a little bit about the curse of knowledge, but you remember the movie Apollo 13? That's right.
Houston, we have a problem, right? So there was one astronaut who got left off the flight because he had chicken pox or something. And so when the flight ran into trouble, he gathered up a big box full of all of the things that the astronauts would have access to in their spaceship. And he tried to figure out how to solve their problem using only the tools that they had. That's what you need to do as a writer. You need to figure out what resonates for your audience and use the tools that they have access to. So if I were speaking to a group of women, I wouldn't necessarily start out with a football metaphor. I mean, women are football fans. Sure, I'm a huge baseball fan. We can talk about the Cubs at some point, but I wouldn't necessarily go with a really hardcore, obscure football reference. And if I were speaking to a group of men, I might not use the stuffed furniture reference because they maybe don't think about furniture as much as other people do. But so you want to work with the tools that they have. And also, one thing I want to say, Pete, is that many people in business feel like if they're writing important business things, they have to write it in a sophisticated way. And so everything gets really formal. And, it's not just the business's fault. It's most people, the last writing they did was in college or grad school. And academic writing is very different than the way normal people write. So you want to write like people speak. And don't be afraid that if you're not all fussy and to whom and not ending sentences with prepositions, don't be afraid that people will think that you're not smart. Of course you're smart. You wouldn't have your job if you weren't smart. So just talk to people the way they talk, write the way you talk. And one really good way to learn to write the way you talk is to talk your writing out loud, talk it into the record app on your phone or whatever, and then clean it up and make it more coherent because, we're not always coherent when we speak.
Yeah, that's intriguing. I think that's great. And we do tend to enjoy, people have told me that numerous times, like, oh, Pete, it's like you're talking to me.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, good. That's great to hear. I guess I'm wondering about, it seems like there are a number of nuances there when it comes to the speaking versus reading feel of language. For example, I don't know, maybe Elaine, you are the person who could finally shed light on this for me. When I'm reading sort of guest bios, I always feel a little weird when they start with a clause like equally at home in both corporate communications and nonprofit. So-and-so likes to blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and I'm thinking, no, people don't talk like that. So I feel weird taking a written bio and then saying that with the opening phrase. So I don't know. Is there a name for this phenomenon and anything else we should watch out for when making that translation?
It's bad writing. The thing is that if you're giving somebody a bio to read aloud, like a guest would send you a bio for you to introduce them, you want to not do the sort of second clause first thing. And there probably is a name for that. It's just not coming to me. But you want to have subject, verb, clause, because that's the way we hear things, unless we're German, in which case we're used to having things all muddled up. But if you're speaking to English speakers, when you say equally at home with blah, 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 I don't know who you're talking about until you get to the name or the she does, whatever. So when you're writing for the ear, that's just one of the things that you need to remember. It's not the same as writing for the eye. Your sentences need to be shorter. It's good practice to mix up long and short sentences anyway in any writing, but you can't, do a James Baldwin 157 word sentence in a speech. And you also need to repeat things. So like if I said, well, Pete says blah, blah, blah. Pete is the host of the podcast, whatever. So you wouldn't say Pete says blah, blah, blah. He is the host of the podcast. You want to give them a little repetition of your name, so that they, remember that when people are listening to you speak, they're they're hearing it for the first time and the only time. And they can't say, wait a minute, that was confusing. Let me turn the page back and reread that, because they're listening to you. So you need to be clear the first time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, now tell us, we've covered a number of don'ts, things you shouldn't do. Are there any further mistakes that are pretty common amongst business writers? And what should we do to prevent them?
Well, can I give you a do instead of a don't? Write every day is the only way to get better. And you really will get better if you write every day. So just take 15 minutes a day and, shut your door, put a timer on your phone and just write. And the more you do that, the better you will get. I've been writing for 25 years. I stopped counting at 25, but I've been writing for a long time. And a little over a year ago, I decided that I was going to do 15 minutes a day of creative writing for myself that's not for my clients or my business. And I have been doing that every day for 455 days. Mm-hmm. And I've won awards for writing, but my writing is so much better now than it was 455 days ago. So I know it works.
Oh, that's great. And so can you share with us, when it comes to that writing, does it make a difference if you're doing that digitally with a keyboard or handwritten?
However you want to get it done. And, I count journaling. If there's a day that I don't have a blog idea in me, or if there's a day that I have to do my 15 minutes in a parking lot waiting for something, I will just journal. But yeah, however you want to write, and, do different things, because the writing you do at your keyboard is going to be different than the writing you do with a pen and paper. And that's going to be different than the writing you do with a crayon. If you've got access to a crayon, grab it and do your 15 minutes. It's not going to sound like anything you write for business. It's going to be fun.
Okay, great. And do you have any further tips and tricks to get a quick boost to writing quality?
Yes, read good writing. I had a friend who was a writer and always complained that she wasn't getting any better at it, but she wasn't reading any really good writing. She was reading these, cheap little sci-fi novels. I mean, there's nothing wrong with sci-fi novels, but they weren't very well written. So read things that you don't normally read. Read things that you don't have to read for work. My favorites are The New Yorker and Vanity Fair. Those are really well-written magazines, and they cover a wide range of topics. Novels, poetry, it's all good. And just to sort of air out your brain a little bit, because we get so involved with work and with the things that we have to write for work. It's just really good to open up the windows and let some new ideas in.
Oh, thank you. Well, so now I'd love to get your take on, those are some suggested pieces to read, as well as, Warren Buffett's stuff, his books and annual reports. That's good. Could you maybe tell us what might be some examples of bad things? You mentioned the sci-fi novels that I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm reading, say, Rolling Stone or Wired, it just feels like they're trying to have fun with crazy sentences and interesting articulations of things, which is, cool for them and artistic and all. But I just think I couldn't stand to write something that sounds like that, and it might be problematic to do so. I don't know. What's your take on bad stuff or what to pull from that?
Well, I mean, you've got to stick with your style.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I love the musical Hamilton. I think it's genius, but you won't find me writing a speech in rap.
All right.
So you've got to stick with your style. I actually find for myself, and this just might be my speechwriter's ear, that I hear voices and somehow they go into my brain and come out my fingers sometimes. But I find when I read something that's got a really specific style, like Jane Austen, everything I write after that for a day is going to sound like Jane Austen.
Yes.
So be careful who you're reading. But it's one of the things when I was in college, one of my teachers had us do writing in different styles. So we would write a paper and we would have to write it in 2 different styles. So that's an exercise I give my writing students sometimes, to just write a short paragraph as yourself, and then write it as if it was a monologue in a Western movie, whether you're the sheriff or the bad guy. And then write it as if it's, a sitcom or a romantic comedy or, Shakespeare, whatever kind of genre you want. Just find a couple of different ways to say the same thing. And that's especially a good exercise for people who are trying to find their writer's voice, because after you've written like 3 to 5 different people, the next thing you write is going to be you, because your brain just can't hold that many styles in it,
Okay. Well, now, Elaine, is there anything else you want to make sure to mention before we hear about some of your favorite things?
Yeah, I want to mention 2 things. I have a daily writing challenge that I run from time to time, and the next one will be at the end of September, towards the end of September. So it's write for 5 days in a row for a minimum of 15 minutes a day. And your $15 registration fee goes to a literacy nonprofit. So we can put that in the show notes. And also, I have an ebook that I would love to offer your listeners. It's called Make Them Listen to You. So it's it's actually 6 tips on how to communicate effectively with your people, whether you're writing a speech or writing anything.
Okay, thank you. Well, now could you share with us a favorite quote?
Oh, I think I would have to say Seth Godin. Seth Godin has many quotable quotes, but my favorite one that I find myself repeating often is, people like us do things like this. And it's a great thing to think about when you're marketing, right? Because you're not marketing to some faceless, nameless blob. You're marketing people like me, people like us do things like this. So if I take a writing class, then I'm the kind of person who takes a writing class, and people like us take writing classes because they want to improve. So I think people like us do things like this.
Oh, thank you. And how about a favorite book?
In the business world, I would say The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. That is the book that I've read that's given me the most to think about. In terms of writing, Anne Lamott's book, Bird by Bird, is a really lovely guide to how to think about writing. And also Stephen King, who I don't read his novels, but he's written a really good book for writers. It's called On Writing. So there you go, 3.
Oh, thank you. And how about a favorite tool?
My portable keyboard for my iPad. It lets me write everywhere I am. Although I did write a blog post on my phone this weekend, which was my first time doing that. And I felt very millennial.
Is there a particular brand of keyboard? Is it Bluetooth, or does it connect directly into there? Is it Apple's?
It's a Bluetooth. It's not Apple's. It's Logitech.
All right.
And I like it because it's blue. They have it in different colors, but it's very flat, and it's Bluetooth, and it's easy to connect, and it slips right into my purse with my iPad.
Lovely. And is there a favorite habit, a personal practice of yours?
I am a list maker, and I have come late to the world of lists. I've only been doing it for maybe a year and a half at this point, but I cannot live without my lists. I make lists the night before. Actually, I just started using a new journal. It's the Best Self Journal, and it combines all of my different list making things into one book. So it's got a daily journal for, keeping track of my appointments. It's got space for my to-do list. It's got space for my daily gratitudes in the morning and the evening, and space for my quarterly goals and the things that I'm going to do each day to accomplish those quarterly goals. It's a fabulous book.
Oh, cool.
I guess that's my favorite tool. Forget the Logitech keyboard.
Okay.
Go buy a Best Self Journal.
Okay. And if folks want to learn more, get in touch, where would you point them?
Bennett, Inc., BENNETTINK, like ink from a pen.com. Or you can find me on Twitter at BizSpeechwriter, B-I-Z, and speechwriter spelled out.
And do you have a final challenge or call to action you'd issue to folks seeking to be more awesome at their jobs?
Write every day, whether you want to or not. Just write. It really will help.
Okay. Well, Elaine, thank you so much for taking this time. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Pete.
One thing that's really stuck with me and resonated from this conversation is Warren Buffett's advice to tell the truth, tell the whole truth, tell the truth, don't hold anything back. I think that is so on point because not that I'm a liar or I practice deception, but I find that I often wonder, what part of the story do I share and when do I share it and should I share? And it can be so simplifying to say, all right, well, hey, here's exactly what happened. I made a mistake. I've got some ideas for how to make that better. And then in so doing, you really do engender additional trust and respect from folks. And if you screw it up and then you lie about it or you don't proactively share in time in order to be fixed, you really compound your problems in a big way. So I think that's just such a quick way to resolve the question of what do I say and when? Well, just be like Warren Buffett. Tell the truth, tell the whole truth, and don't hold anything back, and they'll do it. So if you'd like to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we referenced here, it's over at awesomeatyourjob.com/Ep194. And I encourage you, if you haven't already, push subscribe. You'll hear from our next guest. It is Stacey Hunke. She is talking about how to do your messages, live in presentation format, have a lot of presence and gravitas and respect when you're speaking up so that you are heard. So I hope to catch you then, and peace.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. To get the most out of this conversation, visit awesomeatyourjob.com to find today's show notes, transcript, and infographic summary cheat sheet. For more entertaining professional skill sharpening, be sure to subscribe to catch the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.